This is the most ferocious death fleet in the universe, constantly waging war on different planets. Whenever they conquer a life-sustaining planet, they go on a rampage, plundering all resources and capturing all the adult males. Afterward, they activate a powerful planet-destroying cannon, turning the planet into a dead star. Finally, they transform all the captives into killing machines that must obey orders. They are called the Death Bringers, and they serve a ruler named Lord Marshall. He was once an ordinary man, but after making a pilgrimage to the Stargate alone, he returned as a powerful demigod. He can easily strip souls from their bodies, and no one can challenge him. Thus, his ambition to conquer the universe was ignited, and he began to invade other planets across the galaxy. Now, most of the galaxy belongs to him. On the surface, he is an untouchable interstellar overlord, but in reality, there is something that makes him restless. Once, a prophet foretold that Lord Marshall would be killed by a male from the Avenger star. Lord Marshall believed the prophecy, and to prevent it from coming true, he led the Death Fleet to destroy the Avenger star, killing everyone on the planet. Even unborn fetuses were not spared. However, he didn't know that there was a survivor from the Avenger star, and that person is Riddick. Now, Riddick is the most wanted fugitive in the universe. His beastly instincts combined with his night vision make him an unparalleled fighter. On planet UV-6, in the midst of a snowstorm, Riddick leaps and runs between high walls, fleeing desperately without looking back. He is being hunted by the universe's most formidable bounty hunters, but they seem to have underestimated his abilities. Riddick easily dodges one attack after another with a leap. Since escaping from the monster planet, Riddick has lived alone in this barren land for 5 years. He hasn't told anyone, but now the bounty hunters have found him, and he decides to find out what's going on. So this time, he pretends to be hit, intending to lure the bounty hunters by charging directly into a treacherous canyon, but the hunters didn't fall for the trick. So Riddick arrogantly stands at the entrance of the cave, taunting them. The bounty hunter captain, enraged, recklessly pilots his ship into the canyon, but with the wings less than 1.5 meters from the rock walls, they can only move forward slowly, searching for Riddick's figure. Little do they know, they have gone from hunters to Riddick's prey. Soon, Riddick begins to fight back against the bounty hunters. Using the familiar terrain, he skillfully takes out the gunners hanging from the wings. All they can hear is the sound of their comrades' screams, without even catching a glimpse of Riddick. Before they can react, Riddick silently reaches the top of the bounty hunter's ship and swiftly knocks out another gunner. The hunter captain starts to panic. Just as he is about to retreat, Riddick sneaks into the cabin, unnoticed, and starts ridiculing the captain's stupidity. Riddick easily overpowers the captain, brandishing a knife and demanding to know who placed the bounty on him. Faced with the threat of death, the captain quickly spills the truth. He received the mission on Suyung Star, where the employer offered $1.5 million for Riddick's head. When Riddick hears the name Suyung Star, he is taken aback, because the preacher and the little girl he once saved lived there. Considering he was a fugitive back then, to avoid implicating the pair, he had the preacher take care of the girl while he remained in hiding here. Only the preacher knew of his whereabouts, so it's clear that he was betrayed. An enraged Riddick kicks the captain off the ship and hijacks it, flying out of the UV-6 system, heading straight for the preacher's planet to demand an explanation, because Riddick never spares those who repay kindness with betrayal. After the ship enters space, Riddick connects the blood purification device to his arm. He initiates cryosleep, putting himself into a state of suspended animation. After a long journey, the ship finally arrives at the preacher's planet, but Suyung Star is currently under level 4 alert, and as soon as the ship enters its airspace, it is intercepted. The pilot signals him to land immediately for inspection, but as a galactic fugitive, Riddick cannot afford to be inspected, so Riddick maneuvers under the opposing fighter, then suddenly pulls up. Flipping it over, he then dives down, flying low to evade radar, successfully landing on the beautiful and prosperous Suyung Star. When the preacher returns home that night, he finds Riddick, now with a shaven head, waiting for him. Riddick initially plans to kill this ungrateful man, but the preacher quickly explains that he had no choice because it was the only way to find Riddick. He needed Riddick's help, but Riddick doesn't believe him. After all, who would ask for help in such a way? The preacher apologizes sincerely. It isn't until the preacher's wife and daughter appear that Riddick reluctantly believes him, because Riddick had never met them, yet they not only didn't fear him but also called out Riddick's name. Furthermore, the daughter could recount Riddick's heroic deeds, which shows that the preacher had not forgotten Riddick's kindness. Over the years, he had told his family about Riddick's bravery with gratitude, so they recognized Riddick at first sight. In their eyes, Riddick is a good man, and they are not afraid of him. Riddick eventually decides to forgive the preacher, but since he's already here, Riddick also wants to know why the preacher would go so far as to betray him to bring him here. The preacher explains that they originally lived in peace on this diverse planet, but recently, observing the stars, he has discovered that the end prophesied by their religion is approaching. However, the world's destruction isn't caused by natural disasters but by an interstellar civilization. Given the gravity of the situation, the preacher dared not lie and introduced Riddick to the elementals, a race that maintains balance in the universe. It was the elementals who placed the bounty to lure Riddick here. Their emissary informed Riddick that the universe is facing an unprecedented catastrophe. A war madman named Lord Marshall is leading his death army across the cosmos. He is the only one to have made a pilgrimage to the celestial domain, granting him a demigod's body with unmatched combat power. Even more terrifying, his death army is invincible. They are purely militaristic, not settling on any planet, but instead drifting through space in their ships. Their ultimate destination is the legendary dark space, which represents darkness, but in Lord Marshall's eyes, it is a floating paradise. Along the way, he has destroyed all civilizations, killing everyone who refuses to submit to him, and transforming those who do into Deathbringers, thereby bolstering his forces. Now, Lord Marshall is about to lead his death army to invade this planet, and they hope Riddick can stop him. Riddick was utterly confused. First, he didn't even know if Lord Marshall existed. If such a terrifying person did exist, what could he alone do about it? The elemental emissary gravely explained that they were in such a hurry to find Riddick because of a prophecy. The prophecy states that a warrior from the Avenger Star will be able to kill Lord Marshall. This is because the people of Avenger Star are one of the 4 oldest races in the universe. The environment on Avenger Star is extremely harsh, and over time, the Avenger people have evolved unique abilities. Compared to people from other planets, the Avenger people are much stronger. So Lord Marshall destroyed Avenger Star ahead of time. When Lord Marshall destroyed Avenger Star, he used an umbilical cord to strangle an Avenger baby, but that baby didn't die. In the near future, he will become Lord Marshall's nemesis. When the elementals shared this prophecy with the leaders of Suyung Star, the preacher mentioned Riddick. Based on the preacher's description, they deduced that Riddick might be that Avenger child, which is why they sought Riddick's help against Lord Marshall. However, Riddick didn't believe that his life could be so tragic, nor did he believe he could save the world. So, he had no interest in getting involved and turned to leave. This earned him the preacher's scorn, accusing him of abandoning them just as he had once abandoned the little girl. Hearing this, Riddick was stunned and was about to ask for clarification when a group of soldiers suddenly arrived, apparently due to his actions earlier when he toppled a ship. Seeing the soldiers roughing up the preacher's family, Riddick realized that he had implicated his friends, so he had to stay to solve the problem. The moment the soldiers, fully armed, pushed open the door, Riddick decisively extinguished the candle and quickly took them down under the cover of darkness. The special abilities Riddick displayed were proof that he was indeed the prophesied child, but he was still uninterested in saving the world. He was more concerned about his friend and only wanted to know what happened to the little girl from back then. The preacher told Riddick that the little girl had grown up. In her search for Riddick, she had recently killed someone by accident, and was captured by bounty hunters, now imprisoned in an underground prison on the Scorching Star. However, that place is so hot that the surface is uninhabitable. Hearing this, Riddick immediately decided to go to Scorching Star to rescue her. At that moment, from the ground, it seemed as if a large meteor shower was streaking across the sky. In reality, it was countless Deathbringers space warships appearing above Suyung Star, plummeting towards the surface like meteors. Suyung Star's Iron Dome system immediately unleashed full firepower but couldn't stop them. In no time, the once beautiful and prosperous capital city was filled with whales, and the people were thrown into chaos. Riddick stood on a rooftop, watching as a massive mothership from the sky crushed down on the planet with overwhelming force. The immense energy spread out, instantly destroying the planet's defense systems. Following that, the entire planet's power grid was paralyzed. Even more terrifying were Lord Marshall's assault ships, which swarmed out like locusts, covering the sky and spreading across the capital, ready to wipe out the planet's air force. Suyung's military urgently deployed 100,000 fighter jets to intercept them, but it was too late. Under the cover of thousands of unmanned attack ships, the Death Army's warships successfully landed on the ground. A large number of infantry clad in black armor advanced rapidly, followed by numerous transport ships that airdropped infantry throughout the capital, initiating a ground-clearing operation. Seeing this, Riddick finally believed in Lord Marshall's existence and hurried back to save the preacher. In Riddick's heart, The preacher had always been one of his few friends. The Death Army, unstoppable, breached the capital, and Suyun's soldiers fought valiantly, eventually surrounding one of the enemy squads. However, they hadn't expected that these heavily armored infantry, though average in combat ability, employed very unique tactics, completely disregarding casualties. When they were about to die, they would activate a kind of massive destructive weapon, perishing together with Suyun's soldiers. This strategy of sacrificing a few to kill many quickly decimated Suyun's soldiers. On the battlefield, the scattered Suyun soldiers tried to hide, but they were always found. This was because the Deathbringers had a type of scout soldier, akin to zombies without brains, but wearing blue visors that could sense heat, leaving the enemy with nowhere to hide. While hiding, the preacher and his family were discovered by one of these scouts. To protect his family, the preacher ran off alone, drawing the enemy away, but he ended up in a dead-end alley. A Deathbringer officer with a battle axe chased him, and with no way out, the preacher stepped forward to fight the enemy to the death. When Riddick arrived, it was too late. He could only save the preacher's wife and daughter. The preacher had been killed by the Deathbringer officer. Seeing his friend dead, Riddick's anger was ignited, and he swore to avenge the preacher. After a night of fierce fighting, Suyun's soldiers were wiped out. Lord Marshall has conquered yet another planet, and his death army is vast. With advanced technology, a grand victory parade was held in the square, showing off their might to the civilians of Suyung Star. Lord Marshall, exuding an imposing aura, looked on with satisfaction at it all. Conquering the planet was just his first step. Next, he planned to summon representatives of the planet's people, to brainwash them, crush their spirits, and reshape their beliefs, persuading them to join his fleet to replenish his depleted soldiers. Marshall's purifiers explained their purpose to the people of Suyung Star, hoping they would accept conversion and join them on their journey to the dark skies. However, Suyung Star is a planet where multiple religions coexist, and to them, Lord Marshall's death army is nothing more than a cult, using the guise of religion to invade the entire universe. So the people of Suyung Star were unwilling to betray their faith. Some even openly expressed their dissatisfaction with Lord Marshall, standing firm in their defiance, willing to die rather than submit. But Lord Marshall was not one to tolerate this. He plunged his hand into the body of a rebel and directly pulled out his soul. Seeing this, the people of Suyung Star were terrified. The soulless body panicked, instinctively trying to reclaim its soul. However, Lord Marshall, in front of everyone, destroyed the soul with his bare hands. The man, having lost his soul, instantly fell dead. Just as the legends said, Lord Marshall possessed divine power. His power was so overwhelming that no one dared to resist anymore. They all knelt, submitting to Lord Marshall, losing the resolve they once had. But in the crowd, a bald man stood out. Riddick. He stood tall, successfully catching the attention of Lord Marshall and the others. Vako, the commander of the Death Army, immediately walked over, warning him to kneel and submit to Lord Marshall or face the consequences. Riddick clearly stated that he would not kneel to anyone. Vako removed his helmet. In the Death Army, there is a tradition that whoever challenges you, you must accept. Hearing this, Vako had nothing more to say. He agreed to let Riddick duel with a guard, wanting to see who Riddick really was. The guard swung a giant axe at Riddick, launching the first attack, but it was just brute force. Riddick dodged skillfully, pulled out the dagger from his back, and with 3 quick stabs, he swiftly and decisively killed the towering guard. This guard was one of Lord Marshall's strongest, yet Riddick killed him without a scratch, avenging his friend and shocking everyone present. Even Lord Marshall was surprised by Riddick's ability. Instead of getting angry, he admired Riddick's courage and felt a desire to recruit him. As the saying goes, the victor becomes the king. Lord Marshall handed the dagger to Riddick as a trophy and sincerely invited him to join his army, but to his surprise, Riddick flatly refused, which made Lord Marshall lose face. However, during their brief interaction, Lord Marshall had a nagging feeling that Riddick seemed familiar. Lord Marshall ordered Riddick to be captured immediately and taken to the base for brainwashing. The atmosphere instantly grew tense, and just as both sides were about to clash, a seductive woman stepped forward to ease the tension. This woman was Lord Marshall's queen but secretly Vako's wife. She expressed a desire to invite Riddick for tea and to see their power. Not wanting to suffer a loss in the present situation, Riddick pretended to comply. The queen led him, arm in arm, to a mysterious and grand hall, where he learned that Lord Marshall was also from one of the 4 ancient races. Each generation of Lord Marshall was ambitious and dream-driven, with a mission to continually conquer planets across the universe and spread the teachings of the dark skies they preached. Their belief was that life and the natural state of the universe were in opposition, so they kept conquering, making people join them. All those who surrendered had 2 scars branded on their necks, which they called the mark of the Death Bringers. They would embrace the pain and then be transformed, preparing for rebirth in the dark skies. Riddick knew this was just brainwashing rhetoric. Rebirth was impossible. Those with strong wills were sent to a strange chamber for brainwashing, where their faith was completely stripped away. Riddick did not realize he had already fallen into a trap. The Queen led him to the center of the chamber and then quietly left. As the Queen closed the door, Riddick pulled out his dagger, wanting to see what they were up to. However, in the next second, the purifier activated a hidden mechanism in the statue, and a powerful gravitational force instantly pulled Riddick's dagger and entire body into place. No matter how hard he struggled, he couldn't move, and then the forced brainwashing began. But before the brainwashing, they needed to read his memories to find out his background. So 5 bioscanners simultaneously scanned his cerebral cortex. Reading his memories, Lord Marshall was confident, thinking he had gained a powerful new subordinate, but to his shock, they uncovered a terrifying secret that made his face pale. The scan results revealed that Riddick was of extraordinary origin, with traces of Avenger Star people and an elemental in his memories. The Purifier, who had been watching in silence, was also shocked by this revelation, and Lord Marshall was utterly panicked. He knew the Avenger Star people were his nemesis and immediately ordered the telepath to continue scanning. He wanted to know where Riddick came from and whether there were others like him. The final scan results confirmed that Riddick was the sole survivor of the Avenger Star people. It seemed that the prophecy was about to come true, and Lord Marshall, fearing for his life, ordered the soldiers to eliminate him immediately. At the critical moment, the Purifier, acting against his usual nature, secretly helped Riddick by releasing him from his restraints. This gave Riddick a chance to fight back. As for why the Purifier helped him, Riddick didn't have time to worry about it. Riddick fought desperately and managed to take down several soldiers who had stormed in. Using a bioscanner, he quickly fled the scene. However, the area was swarming with Lord Marshall's men, and even after Riddick made it to the streets, a warship soon began to pursue him. Lord Marshall had ordered his forces to eliminate his enemy at all costs, but at the critical moment, 2 missiles suddenly flew out of the darkness, flipping the warship upside down. Riddick's saviors were none other than the bounty hunters he had previously kicked off a ship. They had tracked him down using a tracker on Riddick's ship. However, the bounty hunters weren't there to save him out of kindness. They were there to capture him and collect the bounty. After all, Riddick was a notorious fugitive across the universe, with a high bounty on his head for the past 5 years. Although Riddick could easily have overpowered them, he decided not to resist this time and allowed himself to be captured. He was in need of a ship to escape from planet Hell-Ion, so he chose to go along with the bounty hunters and use their ship to flee the planet. The 2 thugs on the ship were ecstatic, lost in dreams of the massive bounty they were about to collect, completely unaware of the hornet's nest they had just stirred up. Commander Vaco had already located Riddick and his group through scouts. To ensure success, Lord Marshall sent his trusted enforcers, ordering Vaco and the Purifier to go together. This time, they were to eliminate Riddick once and for all. Lord Marshall believed that Riddick was the only real threat to him. Unaware that the grass beneath his feet had already grown tall, Commander Vaco had been plotting against him for some time. Vaco had been conspiring with the Queen, waiting for the right moment to seize power. Vaco had tested Lord Marshall's defenses more than once, but each time he quietly approached, Lord Marshall's semi-divine body would sense the danger and alert him. Now that Riddick had appeared as a thorn in Lord Marshall's side, Vaco and the Queen saw their opportunity. On the bounty hunter's side, the leader of the hunters figured that someone as powerful as Riddick couldn't be placed in an ordinary prison. Riddick deliberately mentioned that what he feared most was being sent to the prison on Crematoria. In reality, Riddick wanted to be imprisoned there so he could rescue a girl who was being held captive. Riddick also knew that the bounty hunters would likely send him there because no one knew the prisons of the galaxy better than he did. He was aware that there were only 3 planets in the entire galaxy with prisons capable of holding him. 2 of them were too far away, and it would be impossible to reach them with this ship. The third one was Crematoria, so he was sure he would be sent there. As it turned out, the bounty hunter's destination was indeed Crematoria, which proved that Riddick was not only brave but also highly intelligent. After a long flight, the bounty hunter's ship successfully reached Crematoria, a place more terrifying than hell. The planet was divided into 2 hemispheres, day and night. The day hemisphere burned under the blazing sun with surface temperatures reaching 789 degrees Celsius, while the night hemisphere was a freezing hell at -306 degrees Celsius. Survival on the surface was impossible, and the prisons were built deep underground, making it a natural fortress. Even if prisoners managed to escape, they wouldn't survive the harsh environment. Moreover, the day and night hemispheres were constantly shifting. The bounty hunters had to land their ship in a race against time as the sun was rising on their side of the planet. Despite wearing protective goggles, they were still blinded by the intense sunlight. The upcoming high temperatures would be even more terrifying. The ship was already emitting steam from the heat, but after some turbulence, they managed to narrowly avoid the sunlight and finally reached the prison hangar. Riddick was to be imprisoned 30 kilometers underground, in a unique facility from which no one had ever escaped. Only such a prison was deemed suitable for someone of Riddick's status. However, one of the bounty hunters sitting on him thought this was all exaggerated and began mocking Riddick, even threatening to take his goggles once the mission was completed. Little did he know this would enrage Riddick. Riddick suddenly kneed the hunter, sending him flying out of the tunnel vehicle to his death. The other bounty hunters witnessed this, but instead of panicking, they were thrilled. Now there was one less person to share the bounty with. Soon, they reached their destination, the entrance to the prison, 30 kilometers deep underground. As the gates slowly opened, a group of guards emerged. The warden, upon seeing Riddick, didn't dare to be negligent. After completing the handover, Riddick was immediately taken to the deeper parts of the underground prison. Meanwhile, the bounty hunter leader and the warden were discussing the payment. The warden, claiming management fees, slashed the payment from 2 million to 800,000 credits. The bounty hunter leader found the offer too low, leading to a heated negotiation that nearly turned into a brawl. Seeing that the bounty hunters were not to be trifled with, the warden quickly proposed a new solution. He offered them a temporary stay and asked for 3 days to consult his superiors. The bounty hunter leader, showing his tough stance, gave the warden only 1 day to decide. The prison housed a group of extremely dangerous criminals. Like in all prisons, the older inmates couldn't resist trying to intimidate the newcomer, planning to teach Riddick a lesson. Riddick, of course, understood this, but he didn't take it seriously at all. The next scene would leave them utterly stunned. Indeed, Riddick was arrogant, but there were still some prisoners who couldn't stand his attitude. Riddick was forced to defend himself, swiftly taking down several attackers. Another prisoner attempted to sneak attack him, but the next second, he found himself choking on a chain that Riddick had wrapped around his throat. The would-be attacker dropped dead on the spot, and to Riddick's surprise, the one who had come to his aid was a woman. Riddick found the woman familiar and removed his goggles to get a better look. However, the woman turned and left. The leader of the prisoners, having witnessed Riddick's impressive skills, approached him with an olive branch. Riddick immediately refused because his purpose in coming here wasn't to stay in prison but to find someone, and he had no interest in engaging with the prisoner leader. This statement implied that Riddick intended to escape, which greatly shocked the prisoner leader. After all, this was crematoria. Even if you managed to break out of the prison, you would still have to face the 700-degree heat on the planet's surface. Escaping in such harsh conditions was nothing short of suicide. Clearly, this prison was a permanent hell. But for Riddick, it was like a stroll in his backyard. He didn't take the environment seriously at all. He even treated the place as his home and started enjoying a bath. As he finished bathing and stepped out, a small knife was pressed against his waist. The woman from before appeared from the shadows, but instead of delivering a fatal blow, she was swiftly pulled up by Riddick. However, she was no easy target. She discreetly spat out a blade from her mouth, performing a feint move to distract him. In an instant, she broke free and disappeared, leaving a light scratch on Riddick's face. This woman's name was Kyra, and she was someone Riddick had known for a long time, the very person he had come to rescue. But the tearful girl of the past had transformed into a formidable warrior after enduring the trials of this hellish place. Their first reunion in 10 years, however, didn't go well. At that moment, the prison's loudspeakers announced mealtime, and the prisoners immediately grew tense and noisy. They weren't worried about not getting food, though, because the ones being fed were not the prisoners, but rather a few vicious and ferocious hellhounds released by the guards. These beasts, once enraged, would raise their spikes and emit a red glow. Their speed was terrifyingly fast, and anyone they caught had no chance of survival. In such a situation, the only way to save your life was to lock yourself inside a cage. To cut prison costs, every time new prisoners arrived, the prison would hold this cruel event to start cleaning out the sick and weak prisoners. The warden had always used this method to control the population and discipline the unruly inmates, thereby solidifying his position. Meanwhile, Kyra found herself in trouble as a hellhound stared her down. Its sharp eyes and exposed fangs indicated it was in a transformed state. The redder its color, the stronger it was. But this didn't scare Kyra. Agile and unflustered, she deftly avoided the danger. Clearly, she had already adapted to all the dangers here. While the screams of the prisoners filled the air, the remaining prisoners quickly fled into the cages. As a newcomer, Riddick didn't want to squeeze into a cage and instead hid in a secluded corner. However, he was soon cornered by a hellhound at the entrance. Riddick removed his goggles, revealing his gleaming night vision eyes. The hellhound seemed to sense this and slowly extended its head, locking its fierce gaze onto Riddick. To its surprise, Riddick stared back with his glowing eyes, but in the next second, the hellhound froze in place. Riddick's eyes seemed to hold some kind of power, and after just one look, the hellhound saw him as family. The once fierce hellhound became as obedient as a puppy in Riddick's presence. The prisoner leader, witnessing this scene, was utterly stunned, thinking there must be something wrong with the hellhound. Suddenly, the sirens blared again, and the hellhound, looking reluctant, prepared to return to its cage. As it left, it didn't forget to show its ferocity, giving the prisoner leader a parting warning. Just as one wave ended, another began. Kyra was cornered in her cell by several guards. They were preparing to search her, ostensibly to check for hidden weapons. Of course, this was just an excuse. Their real intention was to take advantage of her. As they began to grope Kyra, but they had no idea that this woman was no pushover. With a single kick, she shattered one of their weapons. Then, with a series of fierce moves, she knocked one of them out cold. The other guards were left dumbfounded, shocked that she was a rose with thorns. So, the three guards charged at Kyra to subdue her. Kyra quickly defended herself, but despite her skill, she was overwhelmed by their numbers. In the end, she was pinned down and overpowered. One of them even tried to grope her further, but Riddick, unable to watch any longer, casually walked over with a teacup in hand. He warned the three guards to leave with their comrade before he took action, but the guards, confident in their numbers and armed with knives, didn't take his words seriously. They threatened to teach him a lesson, underestimating him because he appeared unarmed. Seeing this, Riddick dropped his low profile and declared that if they didn't leave, he would kill them with the teacup in his hand. The guards had never seen such an arrogant prisoner before. After a brief discussion, they concluded that he was bluffing. The guards conferred among themselves and decided that since Riddick was new and hadn't been registered yet, no one would know if they killed him. One guard sneered, immediately pulling out a dagger and charging at him. To his shock, his comrade was really killed by the teacup. The remaining two guards were so terrified that they trembled uncontrollably, trying to muster the courage to fight. But when they saw Riddick pick up a piece of wire and place it back on the stone where he had just killed their comrade, they instantly chickened out. Abandoning any thought of resistance, they quickly dragged their fallen comrade away from the scene. Seeing this, Kyra looked at Riddick with admiration, realizing that he was still the same Riddick as before. Although Kyra was saved by Riddick, the two of them ended up arguing. Kyra had idolized Riddick since childhood, seeing him as family. When Riddick had left without a word, she believed he had abandoned her and resented him for not coming back to find her all these years. Riddick, too, had his difficulties. He had been hunted by bounty hunters for years, and it was to protect Kyra's safety that he had left without a word. He had been surviving on an icy planet for 5 years, and perhaps neither of them fully understood what the other wanted. But after hearing Riddick's explanation, they managed to resolve the misunderstanding between them. That night, the guards opened the lift controls, and the prison's control room slowly rose, ready to reach the surface and ventilate the prison. When Riddick saw the scene, his eyes lit up. He realized this could be his chance to escape. Meanwhile, the leader of the prisoners, watching Riddick, couldn't help but reassess him. He asked Riddick who he really was. Riddick replied that it didn't matter. What mattered was that he had a way out. If the prisoner leader wanted to escape, he should follow him. The prisoner leader reluctantly expressed that no one had ever escaped from this place. Hearing this, Riddick stopped wasting words. He was going to prove his abilities through action. Kyra's view of Riddick had already improved. She believed that no obstacle could stand in his way. The negotiations between the bounty hunters and the warden finally reached a conclusion, but it came with a catch. They had to live long enough to spend their money. The guards had just detected a Death Legion warship hovering above crematoria. This could only mean that these bounty hunters had stolen the bounty prisoner from the death dealers, which had provoked the arrival of their warship. The Death Legion was infamous, like a plague of locusts bringing death wherever they went. Naturally, the prison guards were terrified, as no one wanted to provoke the death dealers. Therefore, the warden refused to pay the bounty hunters. The bounty hunter leader thought this was just a ploy to steal the bounty from him and his team. This led to an immediate fallout, sparking a fierce firefight. Below, the prisoners watched the control room above as it turned into a war zone. No one had expected this sudden twist. The bounty hunters and the guards started fighting each other. After a brutal exchange of fire, both sides suffered heavy casualties, and the control room became a ruin. The bounty hunter leader, having lost everything, realized that all his comrades had been killed. He quickly grabbed a rope, attempting to escape the battlefield. When Riddick saw the bounty hunter leader, he knew that most of the people above were likely dead. His heart raced. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. It was time to execute his escape plan. Without hesitation, he sprinted at top speed, leaping onto the bounty hunter leader. Using the leader's head as a foothold, Riddick climbed the rope up to the topmost control room. The scene before him was one of utter devastation, with nothing but debris and chaos remaining. Through a tablet, Riddick saw that Lord Marshall's Death Legion had already tracked them to crematoria. He understood the situation. Wasting no time, he opened the prison gates, freeing any prisoners willing to follow him. When he accessed the surveillance equipment, he discovered that the elevator they had used to arrive had been damaged during the fight. The warden and a group of guards were making their way through an emergency passage to the hangar 30 kilometers away. The only remaining ship was the one left by the bounty hunters, which was now the only way off crematoria. However, all the routes leading to the hangar had been sealed off. Riddick and the others had no choice but to traverse the harsh surface, avoiding the 700-degree heat, and reach the ship faster than the guards. But the bounty hunter leader, who had come to join the fray, was skeptical, believing it was impossible. No one could run that fast. Of course, Riddick hadn't forgotten who had brought him here. Without a word, he locked the bounty hunter leader in a cage surrounded by hellhounds on both sides. Time was of the essence. As the sun was about to rise, Riddick immediately sprang into action, raising the control room to the surface. He decided to reach the hangar through the surface ventilation shafts, which surprised everyone. They knew that once the sun rose, the surface temperature would soar above 700 degrees. Even 3 seconds of sunlight exposure would reduce flesh to ashes. This mission was clearly a suicide run, so they had no choice but to race against the sun. But could they outrun it? The prisoners were doubtful, but Riddick replied, "Of course, it's all up to you. Anyone who can keep up with my pace can follow me. If you're afraid of dying and slow, you can choose to stay here." Although the others thought it was too risky, 5 brave prisoners decided to follow Riddick. They raced against time, sprinting towards the hangar. Meanwhile, in the underground passage, the warden and his guards were also running at full speed. Above ground, the group sprinted over jagged rocks with molten lava flowing beneath their feet. Behind them, the blazing sun was creeping closer. They ran with incredible speed, pushing their mortal bodies to the limit in a desperate dash forward. The temperature kept rising, and they could already see the scorching light on the horizon, spreading like the wings of a phoenix. They ran even harder, racing against death, as the path ahead grew steeper, with Riddick leading the way. But luck was not on their side. Halfway through their run, they were spotted by the guards. The warden quickly realized they were heading for the ship as well, so he immediately led his men to intercept them at the next tunnel. The guards took a safer and quicker underground route, reaching the front first and setting up a bunker to ambush Riddick and his group. However, when they did a head count, they noticed Riddick was missing. Unbeknownst to them, Riddick had arrived ahead of them, waiting for them with a spiked flail, ready to ambush. With one swing, he sent a guard to his death. The other guards immediately launched their attack. A fierce battle ensued. Although the guards had the upper hand, they suffered heavy losses. The warden had no choice but to abandon the interception and ordered the guards to lower the bunker and continue their march. The fight was intense, and Kyra was furious, but Riddick signaled her to stay calm. They still needed to keep moving, though they had managed to repel the guards. They had lost precious minutes. Just in those few minutes, the sun was about to rise over the horizon, and they had reached the most dangerous part of their journey. The sunlight was getting closer and closer behind them, and the terrain was becoming increasingly treacherous. They couldn't keep running. They were in serious trouble. One of the prisoners stepped out of a cave, and the moment he was exposed to the sunlight, he was instantly burned to ashes. No matter how perilous the terrain was, they couldn't afford to stop. Riddick, relying on his agility, was the first to climb the cliff. The ship that could help them escape this planet was now in sight, but the situation was far from ideal. As the sun had already risen, Kyra and another prisoner had not yet made it up. They could only hide in a crevice between the rocks to avoid the sunlight. Riddick watched the scene anxiously. Kyra wanted to find another chance to climb, but the rock had become scorching hot in the intense heat. She didn't dare move and was trapped in the narrow crevice, unable to last more than 3 minutes. But that wasn't the worst part. As they looked down at the ground below, they saw the magma on the surface churning under the intense heat, with a massive wave of flames mixed with molten lava sweeping toward them. The prisoners were dumbfounded, realizing that the path to survival was far more treacherous than they had imagined. Riddick wasn't willing to give up on Kyra so easily. He decided to gamble with his life once again. He asked his companions for a rope and water, instructing them to run deeper into the mountain and wait for him there. Then, he poured all the water over his head to cool himself down. After doing all this, he quickly secured the rope to a pillar, charged forward, and leaped down. In the last second before the wave of flames engulfed them, he used the momentum to swing down, grabbing Kyra and successfully pulling her away. The wave of flames and molten lava devoured the land behind them, but it was always just a step too slow. One prisoner, curious to see what was happening, stuck his head out only to be instantly incinerated. Kyra, still in shock, looked up at Riddick standing proudly, his body steaming with heat, and her heart melted at the sight of his iron will. The scorching sunlight was bound to reach them eventually, so their priority was to keep moving. Meanwhile, in the underground passage, the warden and his guards were also rushing toward the hangar. Both groups arrived near the hangar almost simultaneously. The ship was right in front of them, but Riddick and his group stopped in their tracks. It turned out that Commander Vaco, sent by Lord Marshal, had also arrived at the hangar with his men. 2 scouts were scanning the interior of the hangar, and the situation became awkward. It was clear that this group had come for Riddick, so Riddick and the others had no choice but to hide for the time being. However, with the Death Legion in front of them and the deadly sunlight behind them, they were trapped with no way out. They quickly started discussing solutions, but at that moment, one of the scouts suddenly turned around and quickly detected their position. Vaco immediately sent a squad to search for them. There were only 3 minutes left before the sunlight would flood the entire valley. Kyra, growing impatient, rolled up her sleeves, ready for a fight, but Riddick remained calm, telling them to wait a little longer. As everyone wondered what he was planning, the hangar doors began to open slowly. It turned out that Riddick had been waiting for the guards to show up. They had arrived at the hangar before Riddick's group and were preparing to take off. When they opened the doors and encountered the Death Legion, both sides were momentarily stunned. The Death Dealers were equally baffled. As these 2 groups of villains stared each other down, the guards quickly recovered and launched an attack. A fierce battle broke out between the 2 sides. Seeing the opportunity, Riddick leaped into action, leading the prisoners in an attack on the Death Legion. They had to act quickly to seize the Death Legion ship. With all 3 groups now engaged in a chaotic battle, a brutal fight was inevitable. The Warden's men, though they seemed formidable, lacked combat strength and advanced weapons. They were quickly wiped out. On the other hand, Riddick was incredibly strong, charging into the fray and taking down enemies with ease. With each swing of his blade, a Death Dealer fell. In no time, Riddick had left a trail of bodies in his wake, but the Death Dealers were numerous, and no matter how many Riddick killed, there were always more. For now, dealing with these soldiers wasn't a problem. Riddick and Kyra made a formidable team capable of fighting them off. The real issue arose when Vaco, lurking in the shadows, sought an opportunity to strike. Even the mightiest warrior couldn't withstand an energy blast. During the chaos, Vaco secretly fired an energy blast. Though Riddick managed to grab a soldier to shield himself, he was still seriously injured and lost his combat abilities. Vaco, believing the legend of Riddick was nothing more than hype, prepared to deliver the final blow, but just as he was about to execute Riddick, one of the prisoners stepped in to save him. Unfortunately, the prisoner was no match for Vaco and couldn't escape a fatal blow. With only Kyra left on the battlefield, there was no way she could save Riddick on her own. She could only watch helplessly as he was surrounded by soldiers. As Vaco was about to send Riddick to his death, something strange happened. Vaco's movements began to slow down, and eventually, time seemed to stop altogether. Behind Vaco, a vision of a dreamscape began to unfold. A mysterious woman in the graveyard of Furia suddenly appeared. The mysterious woman once again called upon Riddick to avenge his people. She claimed to have brought with her all the fury of the Furians, and with that, she channeled this fury into Riddick. She told Riddick that it was time for him to carry the wrath of the Furians and fulfill his destiny. As a Furian, the power of vengeance within Riddick was instantly activated. At that moment, he finally understood the whole truth. It was Lord Marshall who had annihilated his entire race. He could no longer control himself and immediately unleashed a powerful blast, sending all the surrounding enemies flying. This display of power shocked the Purifier, who was watching nearby, and Kyra quickly rushed over. Seeing Riddick lying on the ground, Kyra feared the worst and was overwhelmed with grief. At that moment, the scorching sunlight began to sweep across the area, rapidly increasing the temperature. Vako, who had been momentarily knocked unconscious by the shockwave, was awakened by the intense heat. Seeing the situation, he decided to let the sunlight incinerate Riddick while he and his men retreated hastily to the warship. Kyra, too, thought Riddick was done for and believed that all she could do now was avenge him. So, she ran towards the enemy warship. However, the Purifier, who had stayed behind, secretly dragged Riddick into the hangar just before the sunlight could roast him alive. A while later, Riddick jolted awake and found that the temperature outside had risen to over 700 degrees, and the bodies on the ground had been burned to ashes, leaving only the armor of the Death Legion. Seeing the Death Legion's warship, Riddick surmised that they must have taken Kyra. He realized that it was the Purifier who had saved him. But wasn't the Purifier one of Lord Marshall's minions? Riddick was filled with suspicion. He didn't understand why the Purifier would save him until the Purifier revealed the mark on his chest. Riddick then understood that the Purifier was also a Furian, one of the last survivors of their race. The Purifier explained that he had reluctantly betrayed his faith and become a death dealer to infiltrate the enemy's ranks. Although he had been serving the enemy all these years, it was not by choice. His mind had been altered by Lord Marshall, leaving only half of his soul belonging to Furia. Knowing that he lacked the strength to avenge their people, he had waited for Riddick's arrival, which rekindled his hope. The Purifier had been secretly aiding Riddick all along, hoping that Riddick could become the prophesied child and, with the destiny of the Furians, bring an end to Lord Marshall and exact their revenge. To ensure the prophecy came true, making Riddick the last Furian, the Purifier resolutely walked into the blazing sunlight. He sought to return to the embrace of his faith, leaving Riddick deeply shaken. Now, Riddick had become the last Furian of the prophecy. Whether for the Purifier or for Kyra, he knew he had to fulfill his destiny and face Lord Marshall in a final battle. At this time, Vako had returned to the capital, reporting to Lord Marshall that he had executed Riddick. Believing the threat was eliminated, Lord Marshall, in high spirits, held a ceremony to reward Vako for his loyalty. However, Vako was not happy, as he had not personally witnessed Riddick's death. In his heart, Vako's true desire was to kill Lord Marshall and take his place. The news of Riddick's death brought a sense of relief to Lord Marshall, but he still felt uneasy. So, he sought out the elemental seers, who could foresee the future, to inquire whether Riddick was truly dead. The elementals did not give a clear answer, which left Lord Marshall with a bad feeling. He made an urgent decision to immediately mobilize all fleets and head toward the dark space in search of what they called the Promised Land. During this time, as the Queen was inspecting the fleet, a large shadow silently slipped into Lord Marshall's guard. However, the Queen noticed this, although the figure was dressed in Death Dealer armor and quickly disappeared from sight. She was certain it was Riddick. Not only was he alive, but he had also disguised himself as a Death Dealer to exact his revenge. As the warship suddenly took off, the soldiers who had not yet boarded were mercilessly left behind. Vako, realizing that Riddick had infiltrated the ship, instinctively wanted to warn Lord Marshall, but the Queen stopped him, pointing out that if Lord Marshall discovered that Riddick was still alive, Vako would be punished for falsely claiming credit, which could cost him his head. It would be better to let Riddick assassinate Lord Marshall while they sat back and watched the two fight it out, then seize the opportunity to take the throne. Therefore, the two remained silent, not raising any alarms. Shortly after the fleet took off, Riddick infiltrated the ship where Lord Marshall was stationed. He killed every scout who discovered him and then made his way to Lord Marshall's chamber. Despite being under heavy surveillance, Riddick managed to get behind Lord Marshall, waiting for the right moment. When the opportunity arose, he swiftly eliminated Lord Marshall's personal guards and then launched a sudden attack to decapitate him. However, Lord Marshall was no ordinary opponent. With one hand, he sent Riddick flying. It became clear that Lord Marshall's semi-divine body was far stronger than Riddick had anticipated. The soldiers surrounded him, but Lord Marshall ordered them to stop, not yet ready to kill him. Instead, Lord Marshall wanted Riddick to meet an old acquaintance, Kyra. who had been transformed. She had succumbed to the darkness and was now a puppet of Lord Marshall. Admiring Riddick's courage, Lord Marshall once again offered him a place by his side, inviting him to join him in venturing into the dark space. He even brought Kyra forward to act as a persuader. Kyra, with vacant eyes, had become a death dealer. Facing Kyra's brainwashed attempts to sway him, Riddick said little, only repeatedly asking if she was still on his side. But Kyra, lost in her mind, walked away from him without a word. Seeing the only person he cared about in such a state, Riddick clenched his teeth in anger, nearly shattering his molars. Lord Marshall had not only destroyed his planet but had now taken away the one person he cherished most. Riddick, filled with rage, hurled a knife, grazing Lord Marshall. This was the first time anyone had ever managed to injure Lord Marshall, but that wasn't the main point. The main point was that it successfully enraged him. Lord Marshall signaled for everyone to step aside, declaring that he was about to break fate and demonstrate the core principle of the Death Legion: the victor becomes the king. If anyone could defeat him, they would become the new ruler. As soon as he finished speaking, he punched Riddick, sending him flying 40 meters away. Riddick, with his resilient body, quickly got up to face Lord Marshall again. He finally understood that Riddick was a beast that would never submit. Lord Marshall decided to personally end Riddick, the prophesied one destined to kill him. Relying on his supernatural abilities, Lord Marshall could teleport his soul, constantly dodging and retreating, leaving Riddick helpless. Riddick was beaten relentlessly, barely able to land a single blow, forced to endure a barrage of attacks with no opportunity to strike back. Barely standing, Riddick was bruised and battered, unable to even touch Lord Marshall's shadow. The elementals, curious about the battle that could change the fate of the universe, came to witness it firsthand, but only if Riddick emerged victorious. Yet, Riddick was soon knocked to the ground by a heavy punch. This was Riddick's first complete defeat. The Queen and Vako, watching from above, were deeply disappointed. Lord Marshall, basking in his superiority, declared his strength and prepared to use his ultimate ability to pull Riddick's soul out of his body. But Riddick's willpower was incredibly strong. No matter how much force Lord Marshall used, he couldn't extract Riddick's soul. Instead, he was sent flying by Riddick. Humiliated, Lord Marshall could no longer bear it. After decades of warfare, he had never been struck by anyone. He swiftly used his ghostly speed, grabbed the scepter from a statue, and charged at Riddick once more to make him feel his power. With the scepter in hand, Lord Marshall's combat strength skyrocketed again. Riddick, having no place to hide, could only rely on his armor to block the attacks. Riddick was once again beaten to the ground, and as Lord Marshall approached to strangle Riddick and end his life, Vako, who had been watching the battle, could no longer stand by. He drew his weapon, preparing to rebel, but before Vako could intervene, Lord Marshall suddenly let out a scream of agony. Kyra had stabbed Lord Marshall from behind in a surprise attack. It turned out that Kyra had regained her senses the moment Riddick repeatedly asked her if she was still on his side. She had pretended to be under Lord Marshall's control, waiting for the critical moment to strike. Although the stab didn't kill Lord Marshall, it incapacitated him. After Lord Marshall lashed out and sent Kyra flying with a punch, he lost the ability to fight. Now both Lord Marshall and Riddick were severely injured and unable to continue battling. Kyra, however, had collided with a column covered in blades, piercing her heart. She had no chance of survival. Riddick, overwhelmed with grief, watched the scene unfold, his anger now beyond control. In the chaos, Vako finally took action. Having endured for years under Lord Marshall's rule, he now saw his opportunity to seize power. Kneeling at Lord Marshall's feet, Vako prepared to strike. As long as he personally killed Lord Marshall, he would become the new king. Lord Marshall initially thought Vako was acting out of loyalty, but in the next second, he realized the truth with horror. Vako raised his weapon to deliver a fatal blow. Panicking, Lord Marshall attempted to use his soul-shifting ability to avoid the deadly strike, but halfway through his soul shift, he was stunned. Riddick had anticipated his move. If Lord Marshall retreated, he would be killed by Vako. Time seemed to stand still. Lord Marshall's physical body was focused on Vako, while his soul was fixated on Riddick. Realizing that he was doomed, Lord Marshall decided to die at Riddick's hands. He glared at Vako, then made his move to transfer to Riddick. He refused to let Vako, the traitor, usurp his throne. In the end, Lord Marshall couldn't escape his fate and fell to Riddick's knife and Vako's betrayal. The Queen screamed in disbelief. Despite all their schemes, their plan to seize the throne had failed. After killing Lord Marshall, Riddick cradled Kyra's increasingly cold body. Watching Kyra die in front of him, a tear quietly rolled down his cheek. This iron-willed warrior had never felt such sorrow. He couldn't hold on any longer and slowly sank into Lord Marshall's throne. The surrounding death dealers began to approach Riddick. Vaco, though resentful, had to accept that the victor was king. According to the Death Dealer's traditions, Riddick had rightfully become the new king of the Death Legion. Still deep in grief, Riddick was unaware of this. When he finally looked up, he saw Vaco and his followers kneeling before him. Riddick had become the most powerful man in the universe, yet he couldn't stand the idea of a life of luxury. After all, he was used to a life of fighting and survival, where he never knew if he'd get his next meal. Now surrounded by concubines and enjoying abundant food and luxury, this new life was something Riddick couldn't get used to. His reign as the new king didn't last long because Riddick never had the ambition to be a ruler. He was used to the life of a fugitive, and being a king was nothing like being a wanderer. To be a king, you need strategy, ambition, and vision, but as a wanderer, all you need is personal strength. Riddick sat on the throne for a few years, but he lacked the ambition to expand his empire and made no significant accomplishments. He didn't even lead the Death Legion into the dark space. As a result, he faced multiple assassination attempts. Only Vaco saw through Riddick's true intentions and understood that all Riddick really wanted was to retire and return to his home planet, Furia, to live out the rest of his days in peace. Vaco used this knowledge to manipulate Riddick, leading him into yet another trap. Riddick was deceived by one of Vaco's subordinates and was lured to a barren planet, which set the stage for the third part of his story. I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next episode.